Nice to meet you here. We will start our first panel discussion of the Dialogues on Europe Day. And I'm very happy because Ukraine has 4 Western neighbors, Poland, Slovakia, Romania and Hungary. And here at our panel discussion we have representatives of all 4 our neighboring societies, taking of course into account the fact that usually intellectuals are not very good representatives of societies and usually they oppose societies, but still. The title of the discussion is Our Neighbors Still Don't Know Us, How to Explain Ukraine in Polarized Societies of Central Europe. And I will start with some kind of paradox because contrary to expectations and banal logic, on its European integration path, Ukraine has more problems not with distant countries like Portugal or, I don't know, Spain, which are not in the context and do not know the real face of Russia, but actually we have more problems with neighbors who have a similar historical, political and cultural background. With each year passing of the war, the Ukrainian issue becomes more and more hotly contested in neighboring countries, almost becoming the basis for domestic political intrigues and divisions. So, before that, 3 years ago, Ukraine was a topic which united societies, and now Ukraine is a topic which really deeply divides societies, not only in Eastern and Central Europe, but all over the world. And I would ask to, I will start with maybe a bit cynical question, but I will address all of you. How do you think? Is it true that actually our neighbors do not know Ukraine? Of course, we can assume that average citizens somewhere in provinces do not know much about Ukraine and their knowledge is quite poor. But when we speak about political elites of these countries, about the decision makers, I think that a lot of them know a lot about Ukraine and they know about real risks which are open also for their countries and societies after the full-scale invasion. So my question is, how do you think in your society, in your country, knowledge about Ukraine is still so poor among the society and among the political elites? Or is it profitable for elites just to manipulate their voters, just to manipulate their societies, take votes and take positions in the government? I would like to start with Dorka from Hungary. It is my pleasure to invite you.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Well, so many questions and so little answers. However, I'll try to be as descriptive as possible. Thank you very much for mentioning us as intellectuals who always oppose societies. Well, I'm a researcher and I really love public opinion polls and the like, so I try to look at all of them. Also, when preparing for this discussion, I was actually collecting everything I could in order to give you a close to accurate picture, as close to accurate as possible. Since you mentioned whether this lack of knowledge on Ukraine is real or only proclaimed, well, frankly speaking, it is real. The Hungarian society clearly has a void and especially had a lack of knowledge before the invasion started. And unfortunately, this enormous lack of knowledge was one of the key reasons why anti-Ukrainian propaganda worked so effectively. And later on, I hope we can elaborate on that. So this lack of knowledge is really palpable. I really talk to a lot of people, sometimes I teach, I write a lot of articles on Ukraine as well, and most of the time people with absolutely no bad intentions, without any malign intentions, they are really surprised by very basic facts as well. And for instance, just to mention a couple of them, so for instance, in Hungary, given the fact we all know how Hungarian history unfolded, if you look at current Hungary, you have to know that it is a mono-ethnic and monolingual country. So that linguistic richness, that multi-ethnic, multicultural community, which it was more than 100 years ago, for instance, during the Austro-Hungarian monarchy's times, when it was completely normal for people to speak several languages because they had many neighbors, even in their own cities, who spoke different languages, and it was a distinctive feature if someone only spoke one single language. So that was the exception. Well, things have turned, things have changed a lot. So now, for most people, it is absolutely unimaginable to not to put an equation mark between language, between mother tongue and identity. So, for instance, when we talk about Ukraine, Russian language, Ukrainian language, and that, for instance, having a Russian mother tongue or a Surgic mother tongue or anything like that does not automatically equal not considering yourself Ukrainian, quite the opposite. Well, this is something entirely alien and the foreign concept to Ukrainians. You have to explain it. And we have to explain things oftentimes from zero. So eventually, I think that this lack of knowledge is absolutely palpable. Unfortunately, I think this is largely also due to the lack of contact, the lack of personal contact. There is also the language barrier. Also, Ukraine has not really been a very popular travel destination for Hungarians, so really this personal, palpable experience is also lacking. And unfortunately, we clearly see the negative impact of all this. So there was this void, there was this lack of knowledge. Unfortunately, it is still there, and this is one of the key factors which made anti-Ukrainian propaganda so impactful on Hungarian society.
Thank you so much. And so we can go to Romania. Claudiu, what do you think about this? I think if we compare the length of the border, Ukrainian-Romanian border is the longest among your neighbors.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I was still a very young poet in January 2007 when Romania became part of the European Union. And obviously I had great and unachievable ideals, and I traveled a lot in my head and in books. So when this happened, it brought to not only to me, but my generation and to the generation of my parents, a great deal of enthusiasm. And we realized that in these 18 years, unfortunately, the policies of the Romanian government in terms of getting together, of knowing our neighbors better, were shallow. The steps that we took, the most important things that happened in terms of knowing our neighbors, 2 countries in the European Union and 3 non-EU countries, Serbia, Ukraine and Moldova, the most important steps were done by individuals and small initiatives in arts and culture. I myself, I became an editor. I didn't really want to do this, but it was a need to do it, and I started series of books, Bulgarian authors like Gheorghe Gospodinov, Nadezhda Radulova, Ivan Hristov, Kapka Kasapova. Then with Hungarians, anthologies of poetry from Hungary and from Hungarian ethnics in Transylvania that are writing in Hungarian, and this dialogue, these bridges, I really tried to make something of that. Now, truth to be told, Romania and Ukraine had never the warmest relations. But what happened 3 years ago was a turning point, I think, in this, because except for a minority, maybe a hyper-minority who was against Ukrainian refugees and against the help that we help Ukraine in this great time of need. My fellow countrymen, and I'm proud of that, were showed a lot of solidarity. But it's true that after 3 years and 3-4 months, it's kind of a tiredness that it's starting to, it's sort of a disengagement. And this is part of the a result of the hybrid war that Russia is conducting in the social media and through all kinds of corruption networks in Romania, unfortunately. But we're still there for our neighbors, and I guess that even if things are tough in terms of politics, in 9 days, only 9 days, we'll have the second round of the presidential elections, and it is possible that a far-right politician and a pro-Russian politician could become the next president of our country. I feel that the majority of our countrymen are inclined to continue this process of approach towards not only Ukraine but also Moldova. Of course, it's easier with Moldova because we share a lot of things. We are speaking the same language. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
At least you started.
I started. Yeah.
Mulțumesc mult. Dr. Debnar, what can you say about Slovakia?
In my opinion, Slovakia is very divided in this question, because there are common people, and common people you can solve it at the first wave of solidarity, and we have a lot of immigrants from Ukraine now. For example, my son, he's 11 years old, and a lot of his schoolmates are from Ukraine. And you can see how people from Ukraine are accepted in Slovakia by the common people. But the difference and the other question is our political representation. It's, as you know, with our current government, it's pro-Russia politics. And the influence of this is, you can imagine it's the problem of disinformation and pro-Russian propaganda, which is very strong in Slovakia. And the main problem is with our current political representation. And there are also very strong protests every week. Also, yesterday, there were very strong, we are Europe, we are Europe, we don't want to be part of Russia, we don't want to go to the East as our like prime minister. And the problem is we are maybe really in a very specific situation. And but I think common people and understands, and Ukrainian people are everywhere. My students at university, I have 10 students from 30 in one classroom. They are from Ukraine, boys, girls, and every week I can talk with them. And the same, I live in Bratislava, and it means there is a lot of Ukrainian people. As I said, they are schoolmates of my son. But if you are in a small villages or in small towns where there is no work, for example, for Slovak people, and you don't have any information, you just read this propaganda, anti-Ukrainian propaganda network, and it's a very divided country, really. There's a lot of differences between educated people, between villages and small towns and capital or bigger cities, and so on.
Ďakujem pekne. And the same question to Krzysztof. Of course, Polish society and Poland itself know much more about Ukraine, and I can say that actually your life example, your lifelong project of bringing neighbors closer to each other is really fruitful in Polish society, but in comparison with Romania, in which we will have elections just in a few days, we will also have elections in Poland, and we have one of the main candidates is not so pro-Ukrainian as we would like to see. Mm-hmm. So we see these different ways within the Polish society. And how do you see this dynamic of these changes?
First of all, Andriy, I would say that we can have all possible information about us as we want. We are living in a time where nothing is prohibited, nothing is censorship, nothing is taboos, you know. We see what Oksana was saying before about genocides going on. We see it on our eyes each day. Nothing is hidden. But still, it's going on. So the question, what is the role of information, of this open up of media, you know, free speech, free language, doesn't work. We still have all this hatredness, weaknesses among us. And the situation between neighbors is a good example. And because in my mind, we are living, you know, Poland. You would pretend to have a good neighbor, you know, the friendship, but mature society, but not. We are not. We are small, narrow-minded, you know, fragile, full of fears society. The same in France, the same in United States, the same in other countries. What happened with us? We are small-minded, you know, focus on our self-interest, egoistic societies. And the politicians we are talking about, you are mentioning, you know, they are all products of these small minds of nations. We are living in this phase of our civilization, you know, history, that we are living in a, doesn't matter of the, you know, space scope, very small-minded countries, societies. And one of the answers I have why it is so is that we are living in time of a domination of pop culture. And as Oksana was mentioning this Huntington clash between civilizations, I was thinking about another clash, another very artificial border which was imposed to us, like to the Ukraine was imposed this border between East and West, is between culture and pop culture. Why we have it? In time of, you know, when we think about our past heritage and so on, there was no this division between pop culture and culture. If you make the division between pop culture and culture, then you have Trump, which belongs fully to pop culture. And so you have a small niche of other people who are, so cultural people, having another kind of culture. What happened with us that we made this division? And when I think about this from the perspective of local community, I'm working on the borderlands in Poland, but all over the world. This is again the same question. Why we believe that when we start to work with people in Uzhhorod, in Bereksas or other places, we should go down with our cultural ambitions because it is a so small town, province, yeah? So they don't will understand a true culture. So we should produce for them another type of culture, which will be for the people. It is a big lie. Yeah, because for many reasons. But we somehow, in these liberal democratic countries, cultures, believe that we should step down with our cultural ambitions when we go to the people. And if we start to believe in that, the result is what we have in our neighborhood relationships. Yes, because it's when you have pop culture, it is so easy to manipulate people's mind. You can have, I'm coming here from Budapest. And when you go across Budapest, Dora can confirm it, you have President Zelensky everywhere, on the posters and everywhere. And because there is a campaign launched by Orban government about accession of Ukraine to European Union. Yes, and on the poster you have EU politicians and President Zelensky, and the question, what do you believe? If you want to support Ukrainian accession, you can vote freely and give the access. If you are not, we are a democratic country, you know, everything is open, everything is free and so on. But I'm working with my friend Hungarian, and he at the same time telling that in, you know, following this in the government media, and in Hungary you have a huge domination of the government control media, the message comes that when you will support accession of Ukraine to EU, you will lost each month 1,000 euro, you know, you will have this or that, you know, less and less. So it is against our narrow particular interest. Again, I'm coming back to this small mind. Yeah, that's how Orban is addressing this message to the Hungarians. So we have free media, we have open democratic space, but it, in reality, it is full of lie. Yes, and it's full of these small fears about our own interest, you know, which, and so egoistic. Imagine even few decades before, I'm not mentioning alliance during Second World War, but imagine American president you know, proposing at stake of giving help and support a business interest and exchange of, you know, you should give us, you know, some of your treasures, and then we will give you support. What happened with us? That's about the pop culture also. It is unimaginable 20, 30 years ago. I'm not mentioning 50 years ago. And of course, the lie in it is that we pretend not to understand that Ukraine is defending also United States today, democracy. Yes, and all others, as President Wałęsa in his letter was writing down, very, you know, as he could, you know, in very direct way, yes, that we should pay Ukrainians for what they are doing for us. But this is this narrow mind of our pop culture. Yeah, that we see this relationship, also neighborhood, in a terms of a business transaction. Yes, and we pretend to be pragmatic in that. But it's not pragmatic. It's irrational. It's not working for long term. It's destroying relationships. It's making us people very narrow-minded all the way. And then we have results. Then we have, you know, what happened with United States. We were talking so long about Central Europe, and now I see, after all these debates about Central Europe, how idealistic we were about the West. We were critical, very critical to ourselves. You know, my work for a very long time was to be self-critical and opening up, you know, all shadow chapters of our own history between Poles and Ukrainians, Jews, Hungarians, and so on. There is a beautiful novel I read again, Cold Days by Tibor Czeresz, yes, in Ukrainian. The novel written in 60s and saying what wrong a Hungarian did for the Serbian and Jewish neighbors in Novi Sad. It was revolutionary at that time. But this was the kind of work to be Central European, to write novels like that, you know. But and now we are waking up, seeing the face of the West. What happens with the United States? Yes, what happens with us, with the West? That's another question we should see. So this answer about our relationship and, you know, these problems we have with image of Ukrainians in Polish or other societies. I think all this is related to this more global general situation of a dominant pop culture impact to our society and becoming, and we should see it becoming smaller and smaller minded, narrow to our common, our particular narrow interest, and that's how this politician can manipulate our fears, and our view to our neighbors.
Thank you very much for your answer, and thank you for mentioning Budapest and Hungary, because my next question goes to Dorka. And actually, in comparison with Poland, we have a lot of things in common with Poland, and historically, probably it would be even more logically that we have some tensions and problems with Poland, but in fact, our main tension is with Hungary, and maybe I will be more precise and tell that with Hungarian government, because that's true. And how do you perceive this paradox, and why do you think politically, when we speak about the tools of making politics in everyday life, why few years ago and now after the full-scale invasion, Hungarian government have chosen Ukraine as a target, as a main tool to divide society and to win elections after elections?
Let's start from let's make a step back and start from there, because it's a very, very interesting story. So altogether, yes, it's absolutely true. Hungary is a very interesting place, especially if you look at the Hungarian government, how it's handling historic legacies and how do we treat the relations and relationships with our neighbors. So let's remember that Orbán, when he made his entree into Hungarian politics and to the political scene at all, he was a fervent critic of Russia. He was vocal, very verbal, and he was very loudly criticizing Russia. And well, if you look at him now, we can kind of say that his stance changed. His stance changed rather radically. There was a way how it went down. So since Orbán made his entree into Hungarian politics, he was very strongly condemning Russia on every single platform for decades. But in 2009, when he was still in opposition, yet it was already foreseen that the next elections in 2010 are going to be won by him, he paid a one-on-one visit to Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. We don't know what happened there still, but we clearly see the consequences. From that day, nothing was the same again. So his rhetorics radically changed. Then the policies also started to change. At the beginning, it meant predominantly economic policies, when he also announced the Eastern opening, which was supposed to mean a turn towards Eastern markets. And it went hand in hand with a rhetorical shift as well. It can also be explained by this extreme centralization of power in Hungary, when it was already foreseen that the government, which has won with a landslide victory in 2010, getting not only constitutional majority, but basically getting a lot of power, which clearly had implications which we still can feel in Hungary up until now. So when it was visible that this attempt to centralize power, centralize all kinds of influence over Hungary, that it's going on a collision course with the EU, with the EU's values altogether, it was foreseen that, well, this collision is going to come, and how the government has braced itself for it was that it started to increase this anti-Western, anti-Brussels rhetorics altogether. And when this anti-Western rhetoric started to go, especially hand in hand with the polar opposite of this, which meant eventually Russia, so the government started to hail and started to praise Russia for the exact opposite, which the EU is according to this propaganda. So the EU was eventually portrayed, and it still is, as something bad, as something utterly ineffective, weak, terrible, whereas obviously the polar opposite of that is Russia, which is governed by a heavy hand, there is glory, there are traditional values whatsoever. But what makes Hungary so interesting in this case, because I mean, we all know that all across Europe you can find these narratives. We can find these pro-Russian narratives, very similar ones. However, what makes Hungary so particular in this sense is that if you look at the Hungarian media environment, which I already have mentioned that that this power centralization has started, and to a large extent takeover of media was one of the first steps towards that. So if you look at the Hungarian media market now, you can see that there are over 480 outlets which are under the direct or indirect influence and control of the government, plus the public broadcaster, the medias, the TVs, radio channels, and so on. So you can clearly see that this is an empire and works according to a logic which it dictates, which means that it works according to coordinated messages. So when this media empire finds a scapegoat, when it finds an enemy picture, it obviously is very effective in transmitting this message because it works in a coordinated way. So it means that all these outlets tend to shoot at the same target, and it's tremendously effective. Obviously, there are many independent outlets which are obviously incomparably lesser funded, so they have really, they really have a lot of difficulties with regards to finance, but they do their job. Of course they do their job. They do a great job eventually, but they can never be the rivals of this coordinated media empire, which is really abundantly funded as well. So we have a coordinated empire on the one hand, we have independent outlets on the other hand, but when this coordinated outlet is constantly pushing anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian narratives, well, that cannot really be rivaled by the kind of opposite side. So unfortunately, what happened was that this pro-Russia turn and this overweight in media, it started to mean that, well, Russia is increasingly being seen as a positive power. Also, the two media apparatuses, the one directed by the Kremlin and the one we have in Hungary, although there is no proven institutional relationship between the two, we can clearly see that they increasingly rely on each other's material. This is increasingly easy because they operate with the same enemy pictures: Soros, Brussels, the West, and Ukraine. So unfortunately, we clearly see that, well, this is ongoing. And since we mentioned that before that there was this void, this lack of knowledge about Ukraine, this void, this lack of knowledge was very easy to fill with lies. And this is what happened. So unfortunately, this has enormous impacts. And let me talk a little bit more about the impact. Unfortunately, scapegoating was super effective. Our friend who has seen the Budapest streets recently has already mentioned this, but scapegoating Ukraine has not started yesterday, but it has definitely increased with the invasion. So a couple of years back, Hungary had the highest inflation rate in Europe. Especially if you looked at the food inflation, that was especially dire. So it meant that Hungarians really felt the difficulties on their pockets. What did the government do? They started to blame Ukraine in a direct or indirect way. They started to call this very high inflation war inflation, implying that, well, if Ukrainians didn't want to fight this war, we wouldn't suffer. So there was war inflation, and the other label was sanctions inflation, as if the inflation was the result of the sanctions taken by the EU. So, and there were many more, but just to give you an insight of how this language politics work. And it works really well. Last year, we conducted a study. Which also consisted of focus group discussions with a representative group of respondents. So we didn't talk exclusively to Fidesz voters, but to a representative sample of people. And we wanted to know what do they think about Ukraine, how do they say what do they think about Ukraine's future, how do they see this whole thing. The discussions were rather long, so they lasted for 1.5 hours. In that time, you have time for a lot of questions. The results were really interesting, and especially so because it was a comparative study. So our partners conducted the same research with the same methodology in Poland, in the Czech Republic, and in Slovakia as well. the Hungarian results were alarming and they differed heavily from the other countries' results. But what were these results? So it was very interesting that even those people who claimed themselves opposition-minded and opposition-leaning and who were openly condemning the governmental propaganda, claiming that, well, it's so stupid, who believes it anyway, it's terrible, they themselves were repeating the panels of this propaganda. So it had an impact on them as well. They were repeating the same lies about Ukraine. Probably they didn't even think it through, but the slogans, the tropes, they worked. So they were repeating it themselves as well. Overall, the opinions were not positive about Ukraine. However, interestingly enough, these bad emotions and these overwhelmingly negative emotions and opinions did not stem from personal relations. So they didn't have a bad personal memory with a single Ukrainian person. Most of them have never ever met a single Ukrainian person in their lives. Also, which we expected to be mentioned but was not, no one mentioned historic grievances. No one has mentioned the Hungarian minority in Transcarpathia either. So that was not present. So it's not the result of bad personal memories. It's not the result of these omnipresence of historic grievances. It is clearly the direct result of this top-down hate-mongering and scaremongering. And let me finish with a silver lining of all these very bad news and very sad news altogether. So the silver lining is that since we can see that these negative emotions and attitudes and opinions seem to be the result of a direct top-down propaganda, hate-mongering and fear-mongering, in case of a change in political will, most likely it can be returned. It can most likely be reversed.
Thank you for your wonderful explanation. I have one more question, because I think that now, taking into the account that you will have elections next April, I think, and taking into the account ratings of Orban and his rivals, I think that Orban has some kind of, I will use a metaphor, some kind of toxic relationships with Ukraine, yeah? Because, in fact, when we see state of Hungarian economy, when we see political rankings, when we see that topic of Soros and Brussels and so on, or refugees from Syria and so on, they were used before, can you agree with me that for Orban, Ukraine is last hope to actually win next elections and to mobilize his core voters?
Whether this is the last hope, obviously I don't know, I don't see in his head. However, it is clearly visible that the Hungarian state budget has probably seen better days, which means that yes, we have one more year up until the next parliamentary elections, and apparently if things do not change radically, it's highly unlikely that the state budget is going to give the possibility to the government of just throwing out money in large amounts to people. So that is not really a topic they can campaign with. The EU funds seem to be frozen as well, so we cannot really expect money pretty soon either from there. But if we look back at Hungarian campaigning history of the recent years, negative campaigns are the ones which win elections, and we have seen that Ukraine unfortunately was once already used. It has been used once for that, and the results are known. Fidesz has won. So we know that so last time in 2022, when we had the elections, unfortunately we were already after the invasion, and this was one of the key topics of the Hungarian electoral campaign as well. So this negative campaign has once already worked well. I cannot really see the reason, unfortunately, why they wouldn't continue it.
Köszönöm. And my next question to Claudiu. I beg your pardon, because you are one of the most wonderful young poets of your generation, not only in Romania, but also in Europe. But I will ask you...
I was young the last time when we've met, 6 years ago.
But I will ask you about the ongoing politics process and events in Romania, and you will understand our Ukrainian pain, because when we are traveling abroad and have some kind of discussions or readings, usually people don't ask us about our books. They ask us about the war, about Russia, and so on and so on. So my question is about the elections that you will have in a few days, this second round in Romania. And Romania, for more than a decade, was a wonderful example of European integration, economical growth, development, building of new infrastructure,
looked good,
fighting corruption and so on. And after that, we saw this shocking result of Czyżewski, and of course we can explain it with the use of new technologies, and we Ukrainians know it very well, because actually Ukrainian elections in 2019 was also very well manipulated with new technologies and TV series and so on.
But not so well developed yet.
But we didn't cancel the result of
and
the
we didn't
election.
cancel the result.
But my question is, okay, Czyżewski, TikTok, and all of the technologies used for it was a very simple answer. But what is going on later? Why we see this result of Simeon, and what is the core? What is actually the roots of popularity of these far-right populist movements and politicians in Romanian society?
2020 was a turning point, I think, with the pandemics and everything that happened there, and all the conspiration is COVID is a hoax, and anti-vaccine, and all these topics just continued and started mingling and becoming a combo with anti-democratic, anti-pluralist views. After a decade with a weak president that we've been voting Klaus Iohannis twice, but he was a very big disappointment. I mean, he finished his second term with less than 10%. So this is one reason. Most of Romanians have this nostalgia of an authoritarian head of the state, not a president, but a head of the state. That's one thing. Of course, as in so many contemporary societies, from United States to Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, there is a resurgence of far-right movements. A lot of people are feeling disenfranchised and alienated, and they miss that belief in the governments and in the policies, and they feel that they need a new option. Unfortunately, this new option came with this Russian mingling through all kinds of, through corruption, through TikTok, through compromise. The old political parties in Romania are really not doing well right now. And in this is the context. Now, I'm being someone who's unfortunately very present in social media and getting often very frustrated, and I'm sensitive when it comes to these talking points, repeated incessantly, anti-democratic, anti-pluralist. I'm often frustrated, but I don't think we should point to or blame these mysterious, narrow-minded people, because this will not heal the wounds in our societies. This fracture between two different views of the world, because in the end, it's about two views of the world. We should try to reconnect this discourse of us and them is not getting us nowhere, really. And I hope that in the near future we could go make some steps. I hope that the far right and friendly to the Russians and unfriendly to Ukrainians, George Simeon, with his Gülen, who is Georgescu, will not win the elections. But even if this happens, we will have a lot to do and a lot to protest and a lot to demonstrate to these narrow-minded people. I hate these small-minded people. Sorry, I'm not against your view. I'm against your vocabulary. We should try to reconnect and have a dialogue, because otherwise we will fall even deeper.
Thank you very much. So let's go from the problems to solutions. And my next question to Marek Debnar. We saw massive demonstrations in Slovakia in recent months, but we didn't saw any political results of it. So my question is, how do you think, is it possible once more to unite Slovak society around support of Ukraine? And how do you think, is it possible to use, and it may it be useful to use culture as something which breaks the ice of this political ignorance or hatred?
Definitely, it's necessary. Because when Krzysztof said about this also small fears, and yeah, I don't know, it's the same in Slovakia. We have all the people have fears for inflation and energy crisis, all these kind of things. And there's, if you want to fight with this or face it, you need some knowledge. And that's the reason why pro-Russia propaganda is so strong. Because when I was working for a Center for Hybrid Threats at the Ministry of Interior during the previous government we have, and there was a very strong about narrative shift from the local, what you can do in your local environment, to some global game. And this is okay, you can do nothing, you don't have power to change things, because there is a very high game. This is the reason why Fico was in Moscow or in Washington, and he needs the photos with Putin and the photo with Trump. And he pretends to his voters, I'm playing this game, this big game, I'm the big player. I think he's nothing, but you understand that the half of society, his voters, it's they are hearing for this, and this I think the small work like the cultural exchanges, all these things, education, it's very important. It's very important for the civil society and development of civil society in Slovakia. I think this is the only way we have now, because the official political situation is bad, and our president signed that law against NGO yesterday. It will be very, very hard, because they want the power. They want to show we can play a big game, but it's not a big game. It's a very local game, because they want to protect themselves and their businesses and so on.
Central Europe is full of big personalities right now, these big leaders. If you look at Vucic, Fico, Orban, you would say that they're as big as Modi or Lula da Silva. In fact, they're just the presidents of small nations in Europe. That's
true. Thank you very much for this remark. Krzysztof, next question is to you, because you are working in this field for a lot of decades, for the whole of your life. And can you share with us, how do you think, when we make some cultural diplomacy, when we promote our culture, history, good neighborhood, and so on, when is it possible to receive the crop of it, the result of it, after first published book, or after the first generation which was taught with new methodology in schools or universities, and how to make these changes irreversible?
First of all, I want to say that to our friend from Romania, I was not saying about them, small-minded. I was saying about us being like that. And I think it's a crucial difference. Yes, when Karl Jaspers he was writing the book about the responsibility of Germans after the Second World War, he was writing we about this responsibility, although he was a dissident for fascism and so on. So I have enough of being this conformist and to try to please our weaknesses. I need more sharp language about all this. Stuck we are, after 30 years of pleasing. Don't tell too strongly about our narrow-mindedness, about smallness, fears, weaknesses, egoism, selfishness, and all this. Because it works, and we don't have antivirus to that, still in culture, because we are trying to please it. We are trying to be liberal, democratic and pleasing, not touch it. Yeah? But it is about us. It is not about... In fact, I was telling something in contrary. I was telling that we don't trust people, that they can be more ambitious in the understanding of culture and things. We don't trust it. So we step down to that. And this is time for us to go out of all these frameworks. We are stuck, with this conformism, with all of that. Because we are falling down year by year. Yes, and culture, that's the answer to your question, Andriy. We can publish more and more books, so on, but we're still falling down. And so something had my spirit now, because as you know, I'm a bridge builder since 30 years, and I do all my work, with people and trying to avoid these easy divisions about, high culture and everything like that. But the lesson I have from that is that we are very conformistic in culture. That market is so strong to us. Why? Because we started to believe that the real impact has something what is big. So the problem with your question is maybe your book should be published in highest numbers, because otherwise you are not successive writer. Is it true? So when we take this criteria from the market, that good is what is big in numbers, then we are lost. Yeah? But this is how all this is ruling by us. So we lost the belief in a power of small, like this meeting, yes, or other things. This power of David, which can change the world, because we will not change the world by big numbers. And this is something what we lost in culture. We have this festival culture, event-oriented culture. It rules us. Yes, so the question is how we can oppose it. And it is in connection also with, because our mind, sociological mind, is very much still obsessed with this Marxist explanation that we think according to our economical basis. So being richer, we are becoming better, which is of course not true. But so being richer, we are not becoming more empathic. Being richer, we are not becoming more open to our neighbors. But this is a main capitalistic explanation, yes? That you should change our neighborhood relationship, making us richer. Yes, so richer means to more focus on our particular interests. Yes, and when you take this logic, you have more and more damage in human relationships, because richness doesn't bridge people. richness doesn't give empathy. Yes, when you become rich, you become more and more selfish sometimes. Yes, that's the lesson I have from capitalistic, situation. But still, we have problems to counter these patterns, from market capitalistic-oriented things in culture. So that's what I'm trying to say, to our discussions, that it really needs, it's challenging us to think more and more about something what I would call counterculture. Not that we should find power and things to counter all these patterns in culture, because now what would it say, you may say about, how we can change situation by publishing books, but we should change the systems, the values people operate with that, because we are the market kidnapped us. We are somehow kidnapped by the West, yeah, in that way, and I don't have answers to that. I think that we are on a threshold of something, but I believe that this is part of, because what we are all the time talking about is about culture wars, and our neighborhood relationships are becoming more and more part of culture wars, which was imposed by Putin, Russia, by Ruski Mir. It is mostly culture war. It is culture ideology. This is something what West doesn't understand yet. Yes, that the power is not about tanks, but the power is about using culture for this front line of Ruski Mir. Yes, which is not limited to Ukraine at all. Yes, we have Ruski Mir in Poland and we have Ruski Mir in United States. So it is a culture front and culture war. And we don't believe, and we don't think about this as a response from the culture side. This, I think, we need, when I hear discussions here, when I hear Oksana Zabushko, I understand that here you understand the role of culture and how it matters. But believe me, frankly speaking, hardly I would meet it in Brussels, or Paris, or Rome today. This kind of talking about the impact culture can have in that, when we can call it culture wars, but when there is a round table about the global things and issues, a few times I participated in that, there is no room for culture in it. There is no room for education. Yes, because very often our liberal world is thinking that when we start to talk about culture, we will start talking about divisions. So we have Europe as an economical, political project, but we don't have Europe as culture project. And this question from our Hungarian person about the role or presence of Hungarians in Ukraine. That's how I think it works also in Europe, that we think about culture as something what divides us, what belongs, what is a competence of our national issues, instead of having rodzinna Europa, the common Europe, which is somehow united by different by cultural values. So culture doesn't play anymore, Andriy, the role of connecting, of having a common ground. That's what I liked always in the idea of Central Europe, that we, being Central European, we had culture as something unifying us, belong beyond this hatredness, neighborhood relationship, and so on. And we lost it. somehow. So maybe this is also about the answer about our neighborhood relationships, you know, to build again, rebuild this ground of culture, unity or values, to having them together.
Thank you very much. Marek, would you like to add something?
No, at the beginning I was thinking about this Booksellers National Prize about economy of art, and it's like...
So, you know, we already consumed our time, and if we would like to consume our lunch, we should finish now. I thank you for really wonderful discussion, and I'm very happy.
Don't end it so abruptly.
And I'm very happy. It was my pleasure to also to hear that you disagree, because it means that the discussion was really alive.
We'll continue disagreeing at lunch.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and you will have opportunity to ask your question during the lunch. So feel free to ask our panelists and be with us till the end of the day. Ďakujem.